Okay. Okay, it's 1:31. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Hello, everybody. This is the Virtual Services Learning Collaborative session. This is the last session of the day, so if you've made it this far without too many tech glitches, we're going to call that a success and hope we make it through this session too. My name is Molly Cooney. I work for the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and I work on our employment projects, including this conference and the Building Full Lives Initiative and Partners with Business. And I'm going to pass it on to Sally to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sally Flashberger. I'm also with the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. I am the project manager for the Living Well grant. And we've been doing a lot of work around virtual services, so I'll talk about that a little bit. And I'll turn it over to Lynn to introduce herself.
Hello, Lynn Robick. I'm an evaluator working at UW-Madison Waisman Center. I'm the evaluator for the Living Well project and a number of others at the Waisman Center.
Hi, I'm Shannon Webb. I'm an associate with In Control Wisconsin, and in my work I do a lot of work with the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, involved with both Sally and Molly on projects, as well as Lynn with Living Well, Partners with Business, Employment First, and Building Full Lives. Maybe there's some other things in there too, I'm not quite sure, but happy to be part of this session today.
All right, so here is the overview for our session here. We want this to be collaborative and have opportunities for interaction. So we're going to start, Shannon, thanks, Shannon. We're going to start by talking about some types of virtual services and technology. And then we really want to get to the meat of it to talk about the Board for People with Developmental Disability and the Waisman Center have partnered together with a number of service providers to look at an evaluation project of virtual services, to look at how these services are working, what are the elements that might be essential, that are important. So that way, when this is over with at some point, hopefully, we can know more about the benefit of virtual services. We're also going to talk about sharing some promising practices and innovative ideas for delivering these services. So we want to hear from you guys with what you've been working on, what you've been trying, and we're hoping that this group of people on this session are going to be very talkative and have a lot to share. So we'll share some of the things that we've learned from service providers who have launched their virtual services, but we also want to hear from you all. And then finally, we want to talk about ways we can connect people to their communities while still at home. We want people to be connected to their greater community, not just to online groups of people with disabilities. So how do we keep connecting them to what's already happening in their community virtually to keep them making connections and building more opportunities? I'll pass it on to you, Sally.
All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about how we got into this space of virtual services. We're all experiencing the same thing, and lots of providers also needed to get into this pretty quickly. So as part of the Living Well project, we have several different pilot sites and mentor sites that we're working with. And early on, after COVID really shut things down, we met with them virtually and started talking about just what was going on. And, you know, we were really glad to see that pretty quickly service providers moved to different options. And, you know, they were really all something new that they had never done, but they were very committed to make sure that they were providing services to people with disabilities that they had been serving in person, and really thinking about new ways and new strategies that they could stay connected with those people, but then also connect those people with other people during this time. I think pretty quickly we started to hear a lot of really positive outcomes. We have had people at different providers tell us that they're connecting people from around the state. So it's not just in one geographic area. Even though the provider might be up north, they might be connecting people up north, but then also the Fox Valley or in Milwaukee. So lots of people connecting that maybe never had a connection before and getting to know each other. You know, there was one provider had an interesting conversation. They were like talking about where they live in different areas. And so they were learning about different places around the state. Also really looking at the different services that maybe had not been involved before. So people who maybe weren't coming to a day services program or some other type of program that they were running had now decided to engage, and many of the providers were actually getting new people to work with and to start to learn about. So that's a positive, that we have people who maybe were never connected before and now we're connected. And of course, everyone is learning about the technology and learning new things that they didn't know, including us, about how to really connect and be purposeful in the connections and what different technologies are out there. So that's been another great advantage to looking at virtual technology. Next. So we've seen a lot of different types of virtual services. I think traditionally what we're hearing is a lot of providers setting up around 1-hour sessions, thinking about different courses or classes. We hate to use that. So sessions or learning opportunities or connecting opportunities, and really setting a schedule that people can kind of pick and choose what they want to do. But we also have heard that even if a person needs individual connection or services, that providers are also doing that, and that they're doing social groups and all sorts of different things around that. Some of the topics that we've seen are having information about COVID, meditation, soft skills, self-advocacy, lots of different ideas. And I think too, they've tried to listen to the people they serve. And if there's something that somebody is interested in doing, they will explore an opportunity. I'm so sorry, my dog is having a fit over here. She might want to eat and go out, but I'll do that in a minute. So if you hear something in the background, it's her. So I think that's a great thing, is people are really trying to determine what people want during this time and to build exploration around that. They're using lots of different platforms, Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, all sorts of different ways to connect. One of our Living Well mentor sites they're using Microsoft Teams, and what they did was establish emails for all of the people participating so they could help them really engage with the technology and go from there. And so I'm going to turn it over because my dog is about to have a complete fit. So go for it, Shannon.
The challenges that, working from home provide us all, right? So, one of the challenges that service providers are encountering around virtual services is just helping people acquire technology. Again, I think one of the lessons learned in this whole COVID situation and the launching of virtual services is the realization that many people with disabilities don't have adequate means technology, don't have smartphones, have never been taught to use smartphones or computers or laptops, tablets, you name it. And so service providers have had to get creative. Some of them responded very quickly to acquiring technology for people. So we've heard that some service providers have asked their board of directors, to allocate funds. So executive directors would appeal to the board. We've heard from service providers that they've gone to local foundations and found local donors so that they could acquire tablets or laptops, Chromebooks for people to connect. You know, some have called their, you know, maybe their internet or cell phone carriers right now, and worked out and negotiated, you know, bulk buying and rates and things like that for adding lines, adding data lines, so on and so forth. You know, a lot of times, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but, you know, when I got my phone renewed at Verizon, they gave me a free tablet and a free data line, you know, and so leveraging the idea that, you know, we have staff, you know, 50 staff that all have cell phones with you, and leveraging that negotiation power to get bundled rates and deals. We've, you know, seen, you know, people, you know, finding used equipment or loaners or donations. How many of us have, you know, tablets and laptops and, you know, phones that are a generation old laying around our houses, our apartments, that we could probably, you know, donate or loan to people. You know, and if assistive technology is needed, and I have a whole nother slide on this, which I'll go to, there are ways to get that, because sometimes people do need to, you know, have additional assistive technology to tap into the technology that they use. And then, you know, always inquire with the funders. You know, MCOs and IRIS, they are payers of last resort. So if people have means to, you know, get technology either in, you know, on their own or through another source like the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, if it's a need for an employment related service, you know, you certainly get the team to the table to problem solve about how to go about, you know, acquiring technology if it's needed. So internet access has been huge. Again, we find that people, you know, don't always have access to the internet. Some people only have it on their phones, which aren't adequate enough for engaging in, you know, different kinds of virtual services. So they may need to have internet, you know, in their home. So right here on the slide are some ways for people to access internet at this time. This slide deck, along with all the other slide decks for the sessions, it will be posted, or is currently posted, in the Employment First webpage, Employment First Conference webpage. Assistive technology, like I said, some people may need to actually have additional technologies in order to engage in virtual services, you know, to be able to have screen readers, you know, different speech dictation, you name it. So depending on what the activity is that they're doing online, they may need to have no tech, low tech, or high tech types of things. So they're, you know, in addition to assistive technology, you know, they may need a picture, you know, picture board about how to log in and get to the session that they want to go to. You know, if there's instructions or different kinds of things, you know, there's different ways to provide that using no tech or low tech. The independent living centers are a great resource for assistive technology consultation, assessment, device demonstration, and they also have the WIS loan program, which is a way for people to get a low interest loan to purchase assistive technology and other assistive aids. And then, like I said, there's the managed care organization or IRIS plan. Not only can they help, you know, potentially with the acquisition of a device, but they certainly can help to purchase a service for a consultation or, you know, possibly some equipment, depending on what the needs are, as well as the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, if it is an employment related service. So I'm going to hand it over to, who am I handing it over to? Is it
me? It's me.
All right, Sally, is your dog settled down?
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay, if not, I can help jump into.
I saw a question in the chat about where can people find out about virtual services. I don't know if that got answered. So. But you could always.
Yeah.
You can always contact your care manager, your CLTS coordinator, or your IRIS consultant to see if they are aware of which ones. I don't think we have posted a particular list, but we could do that as part of Living Well. So
can I add one thing?
Yes.
So in order to find out about virtual services, there is one list that's on the DSPN website. So as Sally talks, I will bring that up and put it in the chat box. This is a list of a variety of providers around the state that have their oh, thanks, Molly, you're ahead of me, that have their, you know, it's kind of a open source document where they can add their virtual services that they're offering, who's paying for those, what they look like. The other thing too is Sally, you know, Sally and I have been doing Living Well Wednesdays, and the BPDD has some information up on their website, I believe, the links, Sally. Can you tell people where the links are to that session that we did on virtual services?
It's on our YouTube channel for BPDD, and when I'm off, I will post that. But if you go to BPDD's YouTube channel, you can see all the Living Well presentations we've done, and there is a virtual services one there. That's probably the best place. They may be linked. They are linked, I think, on our Living Well page. I'm not sure the virtual services one is up there yet. So the YouTube page is the first place you're going to find that. All right, I will take over from here as long as my dog doesn't bark. So we at BPDD, we discussed how we could evaluate virtual services. Because one of the most important things that we think we're seeing is that there may be a place for virtual services even after the COVID crisis. And we want to be sure that if it comes to a time when everyone's really returning, but there's people who want to be still participating in virtual, the option is there. So we have 15 service providers that were invited. Many of them are from the Living Well project, but also from our Building Full Lives projects. And we invited them to participate in an evaluation of their services. So it's to look at the best practices and the outcomes around home and community-based services that are being done virtually. We want to be able to eventually formulate recommendations that we can go to the Department of Health Services with to say why, or maybe we're going to determine why not. Virtual services are important to people with disabilities, and it really should be a new element that's added to waiver services. So the evaluation period is going to run from May through August. It's our understanding that that providers will be allowed to continue virtual services, even if they are bringing back some people to their locations for services, that they will be able to continue through that time to still provide virtual services. Lynn is going to go step more through the evaluation, but we're also going to meet with them twice a month in a learning collaborative so that everybody can learn from each other what good things are happening, what things maybe to change, what were the barriers, and really kind of I also hear the success stories, really hear about people with disabilities and how they are gaining access to peers and to providers and to all of the services that they've had in the past. And so we hope to have great stories also from our providers about how important the changing to virtual services has been. And I'm going to hand it over to Lynn.
Hello, thank you. If we can move to the next slide. So one thing that I wanted to note is that the evaluation is meant to look at group services, so not the one-on-one supports that are happening necessarily, and trying to scope it to what's happening in Wisconsin specifically, not what's happening nationwide. And that it's not a research project, but really trying to evaluate what's working and what's not working. And we're not gathering any kind of personally identifiable information about anyone utilizing the virtual services throughout this project. And so what you have on the screen is just a model referred to as the Kirkpatrick model that really talks about different levels of evaluation. And so on the bottom are the types of things that are easier to determine, but often less impactful for making decisions about things. And as you move up the pyramid to the very top, those things are harder to measure, take more time, more resources, but often are more valuable data points long term. And so we have tried to incorporate elements throughout this model into the evaluation plan. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to obtain information from a variety of sources. So hearing directly from the agencies that are providing the virtual services, and through them, hearing also from the participants of those services, and in some ways also their families that are supporting them if they're connecting with the support staff at the agency as well. So trying to get information from different places. And I'm not going to read all of these, technical long evaluation questions to you, but what I'll say is that there's, 3 levels. So there's process evaluation questions built in, short-term outcome and long-term outcome. So these questions on the slide really reflect what we're trying to learn about the process and the innovation that's happening. So what is happening? How is it happening? On what topics? For whom? Is there choice as to whether or not people participate and on what types of topics and how much? What type of engagement is happening? And also, what are the costs that are associated with this new type of service? Next slide, please. So many more questions on the short-term outcome end, but we're really trying to learn about are participants satisfied with the services that they're receiving, the family satisfied? Are they effective? What are some of those short-term impacts? So both Sally and Shannon mentioned the technology. So we anticipate those who are participating in the virtual services are learning some new technology skills. So to what extent is that happening? And maybe someday we can learn about to what extent that impacts their ability to create new job opportunities since they have new skills in the technology. Another piece that we expect to be very related is as people are engaged in virtual services, that will impact how socially connected or isolated they are in their community. And we know that there's also many other impacts that may happen, both positive and negative, as a result of participating in the virtual services. And the very last question talks about partnerships. So we're interested to learn about what types of partners are being created through these opportunities that ensure that individuals are engaged into virtual services that are happening for everyone and not just for those with disabilities. Next one, next slide, please. And very long-term economic feasibility. So is this something that we can afford long-term? Is it something that will be paid for by those who make decisions? Also, what happens long-term for participants and their choice? So after COVID-19, do some people get forced into doing virtual only when that might not be a good fit? Is it something that people are automatically going back into community-based settings or face-to-face settings when maybe that's not the best fit for everyone? So what does that balance look like long-term, and what factors are taken into consideration when deciding that? And those other short-term outcomes that I talked about, what's happening long-term with social connectedness and isolation and life skill attainment? So those are the types of things that we're trying to learn about through this evaluation. And now I'll hand it back over.
Thanks, Lynn. So we don't want this just to be a sit and get, because this is a new territory. I don't know if any of you have went to the opening sessions that I did earlier, but we designed this session similar in that we really want to hear from you about what you're doing and have some cross sharing of information. You joined this session for a reason, because you maybe have some information to share, you've been doing some things, or you have questions that you want answered. So, you know, I have a series of 4 different discussion questions. And what I'd like to do is, you know, pitch these out there, give, you know, everyone a chance that wants to talk. What we can do is, just so it's organized and we're not tripping over one another, if you do want to share anything you're doing, just, you know, say I want to share in the chat box, or state your, you know, kind of what you want people to hear. And we can share that way, but you will unmute if you want to say anything about what you're doing, what strategies and innovative ideas are you implementing to get people engaged in virtual services. We don't want, you know, all this hard work that service providers, you know, and the innovation that they're creating with virtual services to go away. We don't want these services necessarily to be replacing, you know, the good in-person services that people want to receive to reach their goals. But there may be ways that we can, you know, enhance what people are experiencing through virtual services. So what things are you doing as service providers to engage people in virtual services?
Shannon, I can see that there's a question in the chat around HIPAA and safe virtual programs, and a concern that that Zoom isn't safe, and maybe Lynn can, I know Lynn has talked a lot about, you know, that privacy issue and making sure that things are safe. And I mean, I guess from our perspective, it is a little bit of a trial and error to start from the provider perspective. I do think they're trying to be sure to protect everyone's privacy, but there's no necessarily guidance right now saying one or the other is acceptable. What would you have to say about that, maybe, Lynn?
Yeah, I would say privacy is incredibly important as we move to this virtual environment. And there are differences in the level of security for different systems. And so, you know, for the Waisman Center, we would recommend that anyone who is providing virtual services utilize one of those technology platforms that is HIPAA compliant. Some are, some aren't. Zoom is one of those that has been in the media for not being incredibly secure, though they've made a lot of improvements recently. So I can't speak to whether or not they're HIPAA compliant today, but that's something that we do encourage that providers are utilizing, and that is definitely something that we're trying to learn about throughout the evaluation. And then, as Shannon and Sally mentioned, the guidance documents that will go out later will definitely include elements about the importance and good options for ensuring that privacy is maintained.
Yeah, and I also think that in addition to exploring the platform that's being used, or that, you know, as a provider that you're going to use, is also be talking with people about, you know, the idea that there are other people in this space, and, you know, how people can keep their own information private, you know, maybe having some sort of, you know, sign off to that providers use with people, so they understand, you know, the platform that's being used, the safeguards that's being, you know, that are being taken, and you know, questions that they may have. That might be a worthwhile resource too, to create as an organization. So any other thoughts about ways to engage people?
Shane would like to speak. Shane McDonough.
Oh, okay. Go for it, Shane.
Hi, everybody. Coming from my front porch in Ashwaubenon, Northeast Wisconsin here. Yeah, I guess one thing we're doing within our district, and we're finding ways to get creative with temporary work experiences, paid work experiences for our students virtually. You know, we created a framework of collaboration with Division of Work, DVR, in the school district, where a couple of years ago we started a program at Dorsch Ford where our students were getting opportunities to learn how to detail vehicles. And the framework we built was the students were employed by the school district, and we were reimbursed wages from DVR to supplement the experiences for the students. So we took on job coaching. We took on, obviously, they were employees of our district. And these were 12-week experiences. Well, this past year we expanded to work with Associated Bank here in town, and then COVID happened. And just as we were launching our first student to work in the commercial loans division at Associated Bank, we had to suspend that experience and all experiences. So I have been having conversations with stakeholders in our community, looking at what unique opportunities are developing as a result of this stay-at-home order, and about distance, not remote learning, but remote working. And we are in negotiations right now with 2 employers to engage our students in experiences to work virtually, where we have a job coach who will be with them on a secured line and computer to be doing some filing and some clerical work, where they're getting a paid work experience. So it's not completely shutting down. We're just finding new creative ways with which to not only provide coaching and opportunities, but paid employment.
That's really awesome. Kudos to you guys over there in Green Bay. Thanks, Shane. Any other providers or schools on the line that want to share, or any participants who have engaged in virtual services, how you're engaging in those?
I was just going to say, if while we wait for people to determine if they want to say something, we have heard like some innovative ideas where they are, like if there's an art class, or they're dropping off materials at people's homes and making sure that they have everything to possibly participate in the virtual service. So I think that's been a kind of innovative idea when thinking about that.
Shane, can you answer one question that came to me privately? So Susie is wondering, is the filing done virtually?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. We haven't launched the virtual filing. There's still some logistics we're working out on privacy and retaining information that's proprietary in nature that belongs to the financial institution. It's a work in progress, and I'll be more than willing to share it if anybody would like to contact me or contact you in the future. I'd be happy to share out how we've built it. There's a memorandum of understanding that's being tossed between attorneys right now and legal departments, but it's progressing, so it's looking promising.
Yeah, it's very cool. I would imagine with a bank, they'll make sure they have it airtight from the legal perspective. So, all right, great. Well, let's move on to our next discussion question. So the next brainstorming and sharing question is how can virtual services be a tool for connecting people to the community? So, one thing that, projects-wise with the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities that Molly and I have been involved in is called, a project called Building Full Lives, with service providers who are really looking at how do you use, pre-vocational and day services in the community in small groups or individually to really create community connections that lead to employment or lead to, people having full days, meaningful days. And, as the COVID situation, came upon us, we realized that, people, there's this opportunity then to use kind of that same framework in the sense that we can help people learn the skills they need to connect, in a group with their peers, but then learn what they really want to do, outside of just, being with their peers and how they want to connect to community. And so we can replicate that in a virtual format where we can say, okay, we need to help someone learn to engage, learn to log on, do a fitness class, and it'll be a fun way to start with their peers. But then what about connecting them to some of the virtual yoga studios or fitness opportunities that are happening in the local community? Could they then, could we create a bridge to those opportunities for people? So I'm wondering, what your thoughts are about how you've seen virtual services be a bridge to community connections, and maybe how you've experienced that yourself. you know, it could be about, you know, physical well-being, employment related skills, you name it. So if anyone in the chat, or raise your hand and you can unmute, go right ahead.
Kind of a quiet group.
Yeah.
Hey, Shannon, Sally, this is Molly. I have a question from someone in the chat box. Just wondering about opportunities in the Milwaukee area as far as virtual services. And I shared the link again, but does anyone on the call happen to know of services that are available in Milwaukee, or a repository of information that's Milwaukee specific?
So we know that DSAW, the Down Syndrome Association, is doing some virtual services, and you do not, they serve people with all disabilities. Also in Waukesha County, ACAP was going to be launching some virtual services. I'm not sure they have started yet. I do think, I know Down Syndrome Association is on the list we have, and I'm not sure if ACAP was on there or not, but it's ACAP if you Google it. They were getting ready to start last week. There were a couple, I would look at that list because there were a couple there's a provider in Mequon. I think that he was going to be doing some virtual services. Anyone else you can think of, Shannon?
Looks like Tammy might have. Were you going to say something, Tammy?
Yeah, I was just going to say that DISPIN on their website has a list of all of the providers that are offering virtual services that have let them know that they're happening. It's quite an extensive list.
And we did add that to the chat. The link is in the chat. Molly posted it there.
Okay. So I think that if I think MCIF was also doing some virtual services, or we're thinking about doing it, but there's quite a few, and it continues to grow. But that, if people are interested in knowing if there are some in their area, I would direct you to that list, because Angie Kiefer is keeping it up to date.
And hey, one more thing, this is Molly again. So the chat had defaulted to just allowing you guys to chat with the presenters, but now it's open to chat with anyone, just FYI. And then I also realized we should share that, maybe somebody already said this, but some of the virtual services are not necessarily only available to people in that provider's catchment area. So because they're virtual, people all over the state could be accessing them. So if you check out that link that we shared, it does provide some contact information as well as who the funder is. So if you see something of interest to you, don't be shy to reach out to find out if anyone in the state could access those services.
Great. Yep. I was just going to say that. So thanks, Molly. All right. So no wonder why you were seeing the questions and I wasn't. So thanks for catching those. All right. All right. So then the next question that we want to throw out there, if anyone has anything to say, would be, what are your ideas about how to determine if, when, how much, under what circumstances virtual services are effective? What have you seen, anecdotally, or what are you curious about in terms of, the outcomes related to virtual services? Lynn had, added a lot of questions that we're, probing for with the evaluation that we're doing, but maybe we've missed some. So if you want to share your thoughts on that, any questions you have. Sandra, DISPIN is DSPN, which is Disability Service Provider Network. So it's an acronym. All right. I guess we don't, we tried to make these more than just sit and get some people talking, but I guess when you're in a virtual room and with a bunch of maybe people you don't know, or this is the first time you've done a virtual conference, I guess it can be a little bit intimidating. If there's anything else, oh, I see that someone from ODC raised their hand. So why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself? I can't see your full name. It looks like just your email, but your first initial is K. It looks like. Go ahead and unmute yourself and say what you'd like to. Thank you for contributing. Oops. And we can maybe help you unmute. Let me see if I can find you. Here we go. I'm going to unmute you. All right.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
I'm sorry, I was just joining late and I wanted to see what comments were in the chat. So I really didn't mean to raise my hand. I apologize. Sorry.
All right, no problem. We can put you back on mute there.
Thank
Shannon,
you.
I have a question.
Yes, fire away.
As not within a school district, so we're a post-secondary training program, and so with the schools closing very soon, obviously the district will be, just for the summer. Is there any way for training programs that are out there that do work with young adults with disabilities to reach out to the schools to say that we could assist during that summertime, since even summer school options are going to be not available? Like, we're not set up to do that now, but is there a way that schools would want us to contact them to say that we could provide some services virtually?
Yeah, I mean, so you're saying that you as a service provider can be providing services to youth that may help them over the summer months. I would absolutely, if you're a service provider, reach out to the high schools in your area. We found that CLTS is paying, so Children's Long-Term Supports can pay for these services. IRIS, MCOs, they, if people are in the 18 to 21 cohort, they absolutely can, be paying for virtual services. And private pay is an option too. Some families may choose that route. And then I would say flip side, if you're a school district and you need to find options for your students, reach out locally to find out which service providers are doing, some virtual programming or other types of things in the summer months, and try to, create a plan around those students.
And maybe contact the CISA in your area and the transition coordinators there, because that might be another way to get those resources out if you're a provider. They do a lot of newsletters that they can quickly get out to all the school districts. So your CISOs would also, those are the cooperatives. Those would also be good ideas to connect with, I think.
Okay.
And as we heard at the plenary session, DVR is funding some virtual stuff this summer for youth with their new PREETS virtual programs. So.
Yeah. And I guess that was my main question, was just that normally a lot of the students within the 18 to 21 are probably reaching out for those post-secondary training programs now. I mean, they normally wouldn't have been reaching out to them, but maybe now because of COVID, they do need the assistance. And so I was just thinking recently, like, well, maybe I need to try to tap into some of the students that might need help over the summer, where it would just be virtually, because we do run our own autism program, which, maybe we would be able to help people not even with autism just for the summer.
Yeah, and and two other resources. So if you're trying to put together some virtual options for people, youth in transition or adults, is on the TIG website. They do have their self-advocacy curriculum posted, so you could pull that down, take pieces of it, use it. It's a Weebly site, and so you could create some self-advocacy learning, for a small group of students. You could also use they're on the In Control Wisconsin website, self-directed employment planning modules. So there's a series of 10 modules that go with a workbook and a resource guide where people listen to the module. They're about 10-15 minutes long. They use a workbook to answer some questions. So those could be played with a small group and then talked about in a virtual format, and people could have the workbook and resource guide to build their employment plans. So, you know, again, it's kind of thinking about what you want to do, understanding the types of employment, who is all involved in helping, how to work with your team, so on and so forth. So we just updated those modules, and you know, they're available on the In Control Wisconsin website, which is www.incontrolwisconsin, all spelled out, .org. And, you know, we'll post those in the chat too.
There was a comment that send any emails or brochures to the long-term care agencies, because they really are interested in what resources are out there, and then they can share it widely with their staff, so we can be sure that people are getting all of that information.
All right, so then our last discussion question, in again, if you have any other questions or comments you want to throw at us, is how can you see virtual services enhancing and not replacing in-person home and community-based waiver services in the future? So we're talking about, you know, day services, skill building, you know, vocational learning, you know, that kind of stuff, and connecting to the community. Do you see some ways to enhance those services? Have you been thinking ahead that way?
Well, I'll just give you a personal example. I have my son is 25, and he receives different services. He gets some services from DVR, and he's in Iris, and he's not necessarily, you know, he is much more, he's a computer guy. He likes his computer, he likes his phone, and he would much rather connect with somebody virtually. So I think for him, it actually is a positive that he could possibly get his job coaching virtually. He doesn't like someone standing over him, that maybe, you know, he could connect with some other options virtually than necessarily having someone always there to support him in that way.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Paula from ODC was going to mention something.
I was just going to mention something that we've been discussing is combining them with our other services. So especially kind of during this time with socially distancing and needing to, you know, be further apart, even when you're in a certain area, it's kind of helpful that way. Just in the fact that, you know, if they necessarily can't be in the building at the same time as somebody else, because say there's just not enough space to configure it correctly for guideline purposes, you know, some of the services they can be doing can be virtual versus, you know, in person, but then you can combine them, you know, with others. So they're still getting a combination of the services. And I think that, you know, like the point that she had brought up too, you know, some people prefer to do virtual or just think it's cooler or just something different. So it's a little more fun for them. So, you know, in that way, you know, for those people that might think, you know, that it's kind of something cool and they can learn something to do with technology from it, I think that's a benefit for them too.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, thinking about the younger generation, I know my, you know, youth, and, you know, I think anyone under, you know, 30 almost is really clued in on this virtual, you know, connecting, and can, they're pretty savvy with it. I don't think my teenagers, I have a 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, really are minding this, you know, this the quarantine situation. They still connect with their friends and everything just like they did before, you know. I mean, it's just pretty amazing. And so then, you know, it's great for us to be thinking about, you know, continuing to connect people, or at least empower them and teach them so that they can make connections, you know, they can initiate and do that on their own. But then how do we really enhance the skill building opportunities with people and some of the more, some of the soft skill development and things like that. I think that's really a, opportunity that virtual services has without replacing what's, available in the community, but creating a space for people, to learn. And again, like I think Sally mentioned in the very beginning, we really are trying to, especially since when we deal with adults, trying to get away from this idea of classes, this instructor, us versus them, and really thinking about it more as these learning opportunities, ways to connect and learn. And I think a real important key component of that is involving, a self-advocate leader or a peer in delivering information, or figuring out how to get the group to, lead themselves, right, in their learning. So maybe there's a topic and some, some brief information sharing, from a staff person or whatnot. But then beyond that, peers are able to really navigate and learn together. I think that's a really important, an opportunity, or I think it's a big opportunity that we have with virtual services, is to empower, self-advocates really. And I do see that there are a number of service providers that are engaging in that strategy of this peer network development, using the virtual spaces to further strengthen that peer network and to really, in a way before they haven't been able to teach self-advocacy in the same, they're taking advantage of this virtual space to really teach self-advocacy skills that it maybe have been when we were in the day-to-day service provision was something that we kind of backburnered, right? It was like happenstance, or, if there was this teachable moment, we would try to take advantage of that. But, there's these virtual spaces where this is what we're teaching. We are trying to empower and teach self-advocacy. So there's some opportunities, I think, here.
I think the other thing too is that we've heard that some people have shown already that they really didn't need as high a level of support maybe as they needed in the past, or that especially definitely in employment, that not having to have a job coach right there, but virtually, that the natural supports have really stepped up. And I think those are two very positive things that, maybe are being learned from virtual services. I wonder if anyone has any stories like that. There is a question about virtual learning for nonverbal students and using virtual whiteboards. I know Zoom does have a virtual whiteboard. We have not tried that yet. I do know a family who has been engaging, and I think it's young adults who all are using communication devices. I'll see if I can find that group and post it, but they it is very specifically for nonverbal students who may be using other types of modes of communication. Mm-hmm. We haven't had too many providers focus on that at the moment, but I think it really is something important. Absolutely. Not to say that they don't have people they're serving who are nonverbal. I don't, but a good thing for us to be cognizant of and to think about going forward, that we don't want virtual services to end up being exclusionary to certain people.
Right. I do think that, again, we never before had to learn these things, the intersection of virtual learning so much, and the use of assistive technology, use of communication devices, and ways to support, alternative learning as much in that format. So I think that we're going to see a lot more develop in that area. I think get thinkers locally, get thinkers around the table on that stuff. There are people locally at either the independent living center or private service providers, people that are assistive technology gurus, that understand this technology and can kind of work together to create some solutions. So, I mean, I would, and then I say, keep up on the news. I mean, there's, going to be more and more news coming out through education and through adult services around assistive technology. And I do wonder, maybe Lynn, I mean, the Waisman Center does have a whole communications, kind of augmentative communication team. I wonder, if they've got to be forward thinking, and same with other USEDs, University Centers for Excellence in Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities have to be thinking about the future, right? And learning in a virtual space for students with communication barriers. All right. Well, I'm glad we were able to have a good discussion around virtual services. And this is all new. And, there's going to be more information to come out of this evaluation that we have with the 15 different service providers, and just all the lessons learned in Wisconsin as we develop this, and nationally, as other states are looking at this too. So I would imagine that come fall conference season, if we're not in person, we may be virtually, but there'll be more sharing about what's new and with the virtual services and with technology and all of that. So Sally, Molly, Lynn, any other parting words?
No, just, I was just thinking about, I can't find the post for the virtual services. So for nonverbal students. So Susie, if you want to put your email in there, I can follow up with you. And also if people are doing that work or have any experts in that area, for the Living Well grant, we'd be interested in hearing more about that. So you can find my email on the Living Well page on the board's website.
Yep, and all of our contact information is here on the
okay, good.
screen, but then also in the slides. So if you don't, can't find it online, certainly email us. We're all willing to help. All right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you for joining the Employment First Conference and sitting through the sessions. And remember that all of the sessions have been recorded. So if you were torn about which sessions to attend, you can go back into the conference website and pull up those sessions and listen to them at your convenience. So have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to save our chat.
Okay, you will save it? Okay.
I'm going to try.
Have you stopped recording, Molly?
Stop recording.
Okay. Then in order to close the session for everybody, you got to end it as a
No,
whole.
I think it's still recording.
Not on my end. Oh, yeah, it is.